Yes, indeed. It's the return of the grand epics, right? But it's also a season of the resurgence of amazing directors. And we have one of them in the house today whom we're celebrating. And of course, looking at one of his works that you just saw. Let's welcome movie director, filmmaker, Mr. Ni Akinmolayan.
Akinmolayan.
Well, there's a tone to how you pronounce it. Let's hear it.
Akinmolayan.
Akinmolayan. It's quite different in meaning.
I know, right?
The way I said
you switch up the tones and it
just changes.
It just changes. Yes.
Yeah. Before we begin to talk about what's this movie now? Lisabi. I watched it and it was, it engendered a feeling of pride for me. We'll go into that much later on. But you have a knack for directing movies that tell profound stories. And I could talk about The Arbitration, which is one of your works as well, and so many other movies down the line. The House of Secrets, that's another powerful one. So what's your motivation, your whys for being a director before we delve into Lisabi?
Well, I mean, ideally, the reason you make films is because you believe you have something to tell everyone, or that you believe you have something so unique that you're the only one that can actually say those things. And the visual medium is powerful because there are a lot of things that verbally we can't say, but once we start showing it, it adds layers of meaning to it. And I have always been someone who has always been really interested in how to communicate a lot of social issues, in film. So you've mentioned really great films, whether it's The Arbitration that explored, sexual, harassment in the workplace, and the position of women in the workplace, whether it's House of Secrets that took us even back to the military era and what that meant, to a lot of people. And of course, recently Lisabi, which is, almost like a mirror of society right now, what we're trying to tell people to do for themselves. And so, I was a bit of a rebel when I was young. I was one of those kids who would do alutas, when I was in school. And growing up, you realize that there's a lot more you can say to millions of people with a film than you can say just screaming and shouting at the top of your voice. So that's one of the primary motivations, and it's driven the films that I choose to make as a filmmaker.
Writer, director of Lisabi, The Uprising. By the way, the movie has sort of awakened people in some sense. A lot of people didn't even know about the story. I didn't know there was such a rich, we know about all the other stories of other people, right? You can tell the story literally, but I didn't know we had such rich stories. Maybe you know about the culture, but not that kind of story, the interplays, the kingdoms, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I actually come from, rich history. So what really inspired that? I know that stories like that are naturally money makers. Right, so there's a money bit, but there has to be something more for you, because you strike me and the generality as a geek on the one hand.
I am.
You get it? So speak to us about the inspiration. What exactly was the pushing factor? I thought, Eureka, why couldn't I do this?
All right, so I come from, it's interesting, so I'm a bit geeky, but I come from a very artistic family. My parents really encouraged us to pursue the arts, so we're one of those families where, you must study science, but feel free to, act drama in church, in school, and I did a lot of that in school. I was also exposed early to Yoruba cinema, the Fadi Yoloros and all of us. So those are the things we watched, when we were kids, and that was kind of like my understanding of fantasy and storytelling, and those stories were really great. So when we got to a point as Anthill Studios, which is my studio, and we started making our own films, one of the big things we wrote on the board is when we get enough money, we're going to start making big epics. So I said, I'm going to look for all the Abijas and all of them. I'm going to bring them, and we're going to do a lot of visual effects and make this film. But the turning point came, I think it was 2021. I saw a clip. It was Lateef Adedimeji and Ibrahim Chata. It was an old film they had done maybe in 2020 or 2019, and they were fighting and they were throwing out these incantations to each other. And it was really beautiful. It felt like poetry to me. And I saw it, I reached out to Lateef and I said, hey, we're thinking about doing really grand epics. Whenever you have something really nice, I do not totally know these stories, reach out to me and let's talk. And it didn't happen immediately. Of course, we had to do King of Thieves, we did Jagun, we did Beast of Two Worlds, and the films.
You said you were part of all of that.
Oh yes, we were co-executive producers on the film, and we were fully involved at the studio in doing all the VFX work and all the production design and the likes. And when he came to me last year, he just walked to the door and he said, I think we now have the story. I said, what's the story? He said, it's Lisabi. I said, who's Lisabi? And so just to, and I used to think I knew all of these heroes, but I realized that we were focused on the fancy ones, the Shangos, the Oguns, and all of that. I said, no. They call Egba people Egba Lisabi. That's the guy who really, freed the Egbas from the rule of the Oyos. So he sat down, he was telling me the story, and I was on Google, and I was checking Wikipedia, and I was like, okay, how come this is such an important hero and we have just one article? I think it was an article on Nairaland, that really talks about this story. And I just felt, the connection was just there. And he was really invested in, making the film. And he had done a beautiful work with Ayinla. And he's the son of the soil. He actually comes from the same place as Lisabi, and it was just a partnership that was going to work, so he said, can we come on board? And that's what we did. But this was a bit different because I also thought that if we're going to tell these stories, let's make it enticing, let's make it exciting, especially for the younger viewers. Let's not put our life in a small shrine in front of a courtyard. Let's build a grand palace.
Let's make him really bad.
Yeah, let's make it epic. All these fancy, Eboras and all these things. Let's have some bit of VFX. So we went there, we took a lot of creative license, we invented characters, like the Brian Chatter character was completely made up. He's not part of the lore of the story. Yes, even the macaroni character, just so that we can, but these are names that are bad names, and we felt that the story would have a lot more substance if we give, Lisabi a lot of all that extra to go. And this is just part one, so you can imagine what's coming next.
So for me, I'd like you to speak to an aspect of the history, because I've seen it, and at the end it says the saga continues. So what are you telling us in the next?
You want to hear the spoiler?
I'm excited.
There are two sides of the story.
Okay.
I won't tell you the second one because that's a big spoiler. It's going to be revealed in the second.
We promise not to tell anyone. If you tell us, we'll tell anyone.
We'll try. I'll tell you behind camera. But the first thing that is an actual fact is he got the farmers to be part of a collective, and in one day they killed 600, Oyo Ilaris, those are like the tax collectors. They killed all of them. We're going to see a lot of that in the second one. And something else happened, you don't kill 600 Oyo Ilaris and expect to go home and chill. And that's going to be
Lisabi, the historical figure, really invoke, all of those spiritual beings to enable them fight the Oyo Ilaris?
So the word Lisabi is Enyorishabi, he's not an ordinary person.
Okay.
He's been empowered. You can argue about, the beings, but of course we're artists, so we're going to imagine them. But if you know Yoruba folklore very well, so there are details that people should pay attention to. Like if you look at his house, you see he's an ardent worshipper of Ogun, the god of iron, and because that's what they use. They use metal, cutlasses and hoes, in the farm. And once you are favored by the gods, what does it mean for a filmmaker to interpret that? Of course, the gods will always send help your way, and that's how we
one way or the other.
Yes, so he wasn't an ordinary person.
Right.
Everyone, every Egba person knows that, but we of course have to imagine what it means to not be an ordinary person, hence the creatures.
Two questions I must ask you. You talked about your background a bit, but I'm seeing here that you're a graphic designer, website designer.
I'm a lot of things.
I'm trying to match it, but we'll come to that because it's important to tell your story so people can maybe see themselves in you and say, hey, me did this. You're one of the most sought after in the industry, right? And I know you like to stay humble. So they can say, well, that means I'm like him. I can be like him or even better. But I want to talk about this movie still a bit. And there's been a lot of reviews of the movies. I don't know how you handle reviews, particularly the critics. And I want you to tell us, when you do some creative work, you put in everything into it. I just see 2 lines of critical, just like that. I don't know how you handle it. But one of the critics has been, it looks like we're seeing the same actors in these movies, right? And they're wondering, whatever happened to the wider pool? Why aren't we getting newer actors? That's been one critic of this movie I'm sure you have seen. So first, how do you handle the general critics? Like, if you know what I did to do this movie, and that particular one.
All right, so you eventually mature as a filmmaker to handle criticism. When you start out, everything gets to you. You get very emotional. You react to everything. And then the more you do that, you now start realizing, you start putting things in perspective. If I make a film and 100 people are looking at the film, and 90 people love the film and 10 people do not love the film, I've made a successful film. That takes a while because the 10 people really get to filmmakers and they forget quickly, that there's lots of people who love your film. So over time, you've grown to start managing a bit of all that. Sometimes, if some criticism comes from a place of ignorance, you try to correct that. You don't compare this film at this budget with Game of Thrones. You have to be sure you're making the right kind of comparisons. And that's it. But you learn eventually that critics are like the audiences. They're just people who have the extra time to type their opinions, and put it online. So that's what I do. First of all, I ignore a lot, but because I'm also a commercial filmmaker, there is power in positive criticism, so we try to amplify that. If people are saying nice things about the film, amplify that, because it means more people will want to see the film. If they're saying negative things about the film, you look at it and say, okay, fine. But what we do is we're very, very, we self-criticize a lot. We look at ourselves and we say, okay, this is what we've done, this is not what we've done well. We already know a lot of the things people will say before we even release the film. So I wouldn't say that I have a thick skin, for criticism, but I've been able to manage it. For the second issue, which is having popular faces.
Like, literally the same actors you can predict.
Yes,
You've seen them in this movie.
It's a dicey issue. And let me tell you why it's a very funny one. So I saw a couple of people who say, you're using the same actors. And I tried to trigger them and I said, okay, fine. Say I want to make another film about this, suggest actors, and they all mention the same actors. Now, what it says is that there's a problem, which we all need to accept. We need to raise, new potential, new actors, but we must also be very careful. These actors have worked, their butts off over the years. You're not going to make a Netflix original, which automatically means a lot more money, and you're going to throw them out. It's not going to happen. Netflix will not make these originals if they do not feel that it has faces that can actually get people to want to see the film.
So it's a business consideration.
Yes, it is. It has to be, a business decision. But what you do is, and if you've studied all Anthill films, we try to ensure that we use some of these bigger names to amplify the work. So a lot of the excitement has come from the performance of Macaroni, Liquid Rose. In part 2, we have I think we have 2 new acts again that we bring in. So it's going to be a gradual thing. You're not going to wake up and impose a person people do not know. They're not even going to be invested in the film. You're not going to put a poster out with somebody nobody cares about. They're not going to watch the film. So it's a business decision, but we have to be very careful about it. But also, when we say these things, we need to be sensitive, because what you're saying is that these actors don't deserve these opportunities, and it's wrong. So if I was going to make another big Yoruba epic, there's still all the big guys that we've not even featured, that we loved seeing growing up. I'm going to give a bit of a spoiler, but one of the things we did in the second one is we brought Abijawara.
It's the best spoiler.
Yes, but we're going to introduce it soon. But I thought it's a good thing to say on the network, and that's what I want to do. It's a good thing for this, older actors, and they inspire me a lot. I watched a lot of them before I became a filmmaker. So I'm working with Uncle Jide Kosoko or Gabelo. When I get to set, I first frustrated and say, Uncle, let me tell you. I pay homage. And it takes a lot to even give them directions, but then the stories they share on set, the experience they bring, we need it. I need it as a filmmaker. So it's not going to change. We're going to keep using these faces while we gradually grow, the newer acts. And, in a few years to come, some of the people that played secondary roles in these films are going to lead films. Everyone should take their time. It's turn by turn.
The actors deliver. Really, there's no miscast in what has been done. From the point of view of somebody that's reviewing it. But speak to this. As I said earlier, it's a return of the epics or the stories about our historical figures. There's Funmilayo Ransome Kuti. There's House of Ga, which was another profound story. There's Lisabi, which is a great Egba historical figure. What are the lessons, particularly, that we should be taking away from this? How have we moved on from this story of oppression, repression, leadership failure? So what are we taking away from this? Because that's the essence of art, really, to mirror life.
And so if you compare all these stories, you see that there's a common thread in all of them, but they all remind us of something, and that is that history repeats itself. It constantly repeats itself. So we've been through a very crazy period, in Nigerian politics, where a lot of the conversation has been, don't sell your votes, stand up for your right, stand up for what you believe in. But one of the things these films have been doing, especially if you pay attention to films like Jagun, Funmilayo, and Lisabi, it's that there is nothing as powerful as a united people, as a united front. But Lisabi takes the story even further. He decides to lead these people, but before he took his own version of the collective, or his own Aro, as they call it, he served every member of the group. He participated in, working on their farms, and so that when it was time for him to ask for what he wanted, everyone was willing to work with him. That's the failure in leadership that we are experiencing as a country, where people do not understand their role as leader. And we're hoping that this story, wakes everyone up and says, hey, this is how great things happened in the past. And if we're going to make anything happen now, this is the only way, because history can only repeat itself.
I want to ask about the business part of it. We're talking business, right? And it's important to also balance things. And there's lots of moving parts. So business. Some have described what is playing out now as the crude oil era. So we have the crude, the stories, the culture. I mean, these are intriguing stories. And then there's the IOCs who come to mind, I know you catch my drift.
I know. I haven't heard it being compared with crude oil, but now that you say it.
I do that mostly, actually. And the challenge is, we've seen what happened, or is still happening in that sector. We've not been able to build a structure. It's just come take the wealth, even sell it back to us as petrol, right, and refined product. So I know that you still have to talk about it. We need money. The actors need money. The studios need the money. But the challenge is, first, are we getting a fair share of the pie? On the one hand, and are we building something such that if the IOCs leave, don't worry, we have our own refinery, our Port Harcourt refinery, our Kaduna refinery, such that we also have something to show the world and even develop other countries. Imagine if Nigeria is getting stories from Ghana and all of that. What do you see in that sense?
It's a very good question, actually. And, there are ways to answer these questions that it would get a bit controversial if you're not careful. Here's how to put it. This crude oil is usually the starting point. And for every country that we've seen a, spurt of growth, in their industry, it always starts like this. The difference is how the countries themselves handle those opportunities. Now, when you see a Netflix come to Nigeria and they excite you to make big films because it's going to generate a bit income, you spend more on technical quality, you spend a bit more on a lot of things, you have to train people to do the work. And what it does is that it improves everybody's life on that chain. But we're going to have a problem if they decide to pull out. We, as a country, we haven't strategically positioned ourselves to succeed with or without them. We should be growing the cinema culture, not shut it down. It makes no sense. Every other part of the world, there's cinema is rising everywhere in the world. Now you can see all those big box office films doing numbers all over the world. Which that's what we should do. We shouldn't say, oh, streamers are here and then let's stray away from our culture. We should look out for local streaming opportunities, local distribution opportunities. So India is a very good example, right? There's a lot of activity, Netflix, Amazon in India. But what they've done is they've also used it to grow their own local stuff. Now, how does, the government help in that? You need to be very, very intentional. The government can say, hey, Netflix, we love what you're doing. We're not going to tax you too much. We're not going to drive you away, but you have to establish something here. For every you have to do this amount of productions. You have to work with this amount of people. You have to set up shop here. They don't have shop here. Your Amazon has studios, in places in the world. Come. We'll give you a big place in
build something.
Build something. If you do not build that thing, we're not going to allow you play in this space. But we're not going to stress you. We're just going to work with you. Now, what would happen is that when you have tons of people working, there's knowledge transfer, right? They can leave anytime they want. We have that knowledge, and then we can grow from there. So a lot of the visual effects talent in the world is being shipped to India. That is because American companies set up shops there, ended up training people, created a pipeline to ensure that work constantly flows to those. It's cheaper labor, but what it has done is you now have other films made in India by Indians, the Patan, Jawan, the Ararat, the Bahubalis, all those big films, if you look at the end credits, you see a lot of Indians there. That's what needs to happen. Until as a studio, we're very deliberate. Everything you've seen in this film was made by Nigerians.
Beautiful.
The cinematography, which everyone is talking about, the music, and we have everything in-house as a studio. Imagine raising that
even the
to
set.
Everything.
We have
That's what I wanted you to talk about.
We have to run now. I know I promised that we're going to talk about your personal life and your work, but maybe when we have the part 2.
Sure.
We'll have that conversation.
Yes,
so, hey, this is just a pause. Watch out. The saga continues.
The saga continues.
Not just for Lisabi, but also for the director, Ni Akinmolayan.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I got it right this time.
You did.
Oh,
Thank you.
go book here.
Thank you very much.
Well, but before we go, Kade, we have something. Quickly touch on.
Yes, the Nigeria Correctional Center had put out a statement after that showing at the National Assembly. The officials saying it was a social media suspension, and they said that their attention has been drawn to it, and they're saying that this is gross misconduct from the official. But how did the official get to the National Assembly anyway? Didn't the official come from your office wearing your uniform? So lots of questions to be answered, but they put out a statement saying that they view it as an act of gross misconduct aimed at misleading the public, but we're yet to see what action has been taken by them to either reprimand or write that. So that's just to give a balance.
And did Mr. Anugwa get a letter of suspension? We'd like to see that, because this doesn't provide the closure.
Well, they said they served him, but we've not seen the copy.
Haven't seen it. And if indeed he was served, why would he say something contrary on the floor of the National Assembly? So those questions still require answers. But we must anchor at this point, and thank you so much for being a part of the show today. We'll return tomorrow with another exciting one. I am Bukola Koka.
I'm definitely going to finish the Lisabi movie because I didn't quite finish it because of the show. I'm Kaido Kikilo. Have a great day. Sunrise Daily is next. Stay with Channels Television.